Priority 1 message from Starfleet coming in on secured channel.
You are listening to the TrekRanks podcast, a member of the TrekCore Transmissions Podcast Network. This is episode 38, featuring the top 5 scenes in a Jefferies Tube. Welcome, Star Trek fans. I am Jim Moorhouse, and I am the host of the TrekRanks podcast. And tonight, we have another one of our very special deep cut topics being delivered straight from inside your favorite starship. Tonight, we're continuing our Scenes in a Blank series with our top 5 scenes in a Jefferies Tube. And I love this topic. I couldn't be more excited. So what is a Jefferies Tube? I'm thinking most of you guys, if you're tuned into a show called TrekRanks, you know what a Jefferies Tube is. But for the purposes of this show, we're going to talk about that in a moment in our Diagnostic Cycle. But before we do that, let's get into introducing our excellent guests tonight, who've both been on the show previously. Because for a topic like this, we need some experienced deep cut experts, and that's what we have tonight. So first up, we have Jenn Tifft, who was previously on a couple of shows, our top 5 high concept Enterprise episodes, and our top 5 Kira Nerys episodes. So I just realized, Jenn, this will be the first time you've got the entire Trek canvas to choose from. So welcome back, Jenn.
Thanks. I'm glad to be back. And it is a little bit of a different experience when you have the whole, 700 plus hours to work with. So
yeah, I just realized that looking at my notes. Yeah. That's awesome. All right. And also making his third appearance on the show, one of our favorite contributors. He's over at the #1 Star Trek site on the internet, TrekCore.com. We have Mr. Ken Reilly returning. Ken, welcome back, buddy.
Hey, good evening, Jim. I'm glad to be here on the most acoustically perfect podcast on the internet.
I doubt that is very much true. And I was just thinking, wait, you were on time travel.
I was on the time travel and also the duplicates.
Doppelgangers,
collection.
Duplicates, and doubles. Right. Okay. So, yeah, all 4 of those previous topics are good deep cut topics, and that's what tonight is. So let's get this show started by opening up the hatch and crawl into our TrekRanks recalibration. As regular listeners will know, general order number 1 here at the TrekRanks podcast is that we love Trek, and we love to rank Trek, and we do that via some deep dive topics, really just to get the conversation started, because my favorite thing to do is to talk about Star Trek.
But what is that Vulcan motto? Infinite diversity
in infinite combinations.
And what is diversity? A celebration of differences.
And as T'Pol and Dr. Phlox just said, our mantra here at TrekRanks is no wrong answers. TrekRanks is basically just a big old celebration of differences. That's what we do. Our show is about all the reasons we love Star Trek. So there's no nitpicking. Not here to argue. We're just going to celebrate the greatness of Trek. And we love it all, from TOS to TNG, straight through to Enterprise and the Kelvin timeline, and now Discovery as well. It's all fair game on the TrekRanks podcast.
Black alert. Black alert.
And a quick reminder that Discovery Season 1 spoilers are potentially in play. So we'll see if Discovery gets any love tonight. And one more reminder that we use the term episodes as a quick and easy shorthand, but the 13 films are in place. So it's just easy to refer to everything as episodes as a catch-all. So all 13 films are definitely eligible. Most of you have probably heard all that before, but we like to reset every week with any newcomers jumping into TrekRanks for the first time. And just a reminder that our entire back catalog is available to download and listen to at TrekRanks.com and at the TrekCore because we think one of the best things about our show is that every episode's pretty timeless. So you can listen and re-listen to the shows in any order you want.
Open hailing frequencies. Hailing frequencies open. On viewer.
And if you would like to contact TrekRanks, the best way to do that is to find us on Twitter at TrekRanks or me directly at Enterprise Extra. And you can also leave us a message with your own picks at 609-512-LLAP. That's 609-512-5527. And for those of you enjoying all of our shows here on the TrekCore Transmissions Podcast Network, you can support us via Patreon at patreon.com/the TrekCore Transmissions. Okay, we got through all that. So to wrap it up, Ken and Jenn, let's have you guys tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. Ken?
Well, you can find me and the whole TrekCore team at TrekCore.com, and of course on social media, both Facebook and Twitter at TrekCore.
And how about you, Jenn?
The best way to get a hold of me is on Twitter. My handle is edatquarks, and please feel free to talk some Trek with me. 2
great follows. Hopefully everyone will follow edatquarks, one of my favorite Twitter handles. And of course, TrekCore is the best Trek resource on the internet. All right, let's activate our level 1 diagnostic and get into this show.
Diagnostic cycle will be complete in 20 seconds.
What is a Jefferies tube? Well, this diagnostic cycle is basically going to be a brief history of the Jefferies tube, which is basically a service crawlway on a starship. So some of the other names it's been known by over the years is access tubes, access tunnels, service chutes, maintenance shafts, and my favorite, the internal maintenance conduit. So it's not a storage locker. It's not the inside of a nacelle. It's not the warp nacelle control room from Eye of the Beholder. Of course, I say that, but ultimately you can define it however you want because that's why we have our prime directive. So you can do whatever you want. But that's the breakdown of what a Jefferies tube is. And we've seen all kinds of Jefferies tubes through the years. You've got horizontal ones, diagonal ones, vertical ones, Federation versions, alien versions, some with ladders, some with special 3-way ladders, like on TOS. I love those. And some that you can stand upright and walk around in, but mostly you got to crawl around. And Jefferies tubes, of course, are named after the great Walter Matt Jefferies, the genius, who designed the original Enterprise way back in the 60s. And the name Jefferies tube was actually an in-joke that started during TOS, which I didn't really know about, so I was looking this up. So the first ever on-screen reference was actually in The Hunted in TNG, but it was part of some of the shooting scripts in TOS, like in Journey to Babel, when they find the dead Tellarite, the shooting script actually says, shot Jefferies tube on top of the script. So I thought that was pretty cool. So that's your Jefferies Tube 101 tutorial, and now we're going to jump straight into our prime directives and figure out how we all put our list together.
I do not concur with your captain's decision.
She's following our prime directive.
Define prime directive.
So Jenn and Ken, I'm curious about how you guys approach this topic and what were your general criteria for narrowing down your list. So Jenn, how did you get into this one and how easy or tough with it? I'm curious how many secondary systems you're going to have on this one.
Well, I usually have an incredibly long list of secondary systems, you know me, but and this is no different. But I was really excited for this topic. I mean, Jefferies tubes it's a pretty unique storytelling device, and it's fun to think about all the different ways that they could be used. Obviously, to move the plot along with technical explanations, fun engineering moments, but I mean also that enclosed space really lends itself to some good character moments too, or scary moments. So there's so many different.
Ooh. I was reacting. I was a delayed reaction to your scary moments. That was a great point.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, keep going.
Sorry. But yeah, so there's so many different ways that they use these Jefferies tubes. So there's a lot to go on. So you were talking about what defines a Jefferies tube. For my personal definition, I stuck with only Federation starships.
Okay.
Also, the other thing I considered, if they were in the junction boxes, the junction corridors of the Jefferies tube, that counts also because that's part of the network, the web of the Jefferies tube. So when you first told me the topic, my first thought was of Geordi.
Right.
Not a particular scene, just him tinkering in a panel on the Enterprise. But then once I started listing all my favorite scenes, it turned out he was just more the the man that keeps the ship running because he didn't actually feature in as many moments as I thought he would on my list. So I thought that was interesting that my first thought ended up, not being featured on my list as heavily.
No, that makes sense. And Geordi's in a ton of Jefferies Tubes.
Yeah, that poor guy probably spends a lot of his working hours in the tubes, right?
Yeah, poor Geordi, and also poor LeVar Burton.
Yes.
Sure, those were tough days on the set. All right, I like that. You're going to keep it all to Federation Jefferies Tubes.
Yes.
That's very pure, very pure. All right, Ken, how about you?
Well, I also have a very lengthy secondary systems list from this topic. With the number of times we've seen characters in Jefferies Tubes on starships between Next Generation and Voyager, or even on their the equivalent on the Deep Space Nine station. There's just so many different options to pick from for this topic. So it's really a wide canvas, which is nice. For me, though, while my initial net was cast rather wide, by the end of the day here, my final list really does come back to the traditional Jefferies tube structure. So it is the service crawlways. In my case, I include Deep Space Nine crawlways in my topic as well. But, I don't have anything like the standing walkways on the NX-01 or anything from, a non-Cardassian alien ship, anything like that. It really came down to characters on their hands and knees moving through the station or the ship.
That's fantastic. There's so many ways to look at this, and I'm a little bit of all those pieces. I think I just approached this topic with just a big smile on my face. If I'm being honest, I really, for the last 2 weeks, have just been, whenever I had any downtime, I just let my mind wander into all these different classic scenes in Jefferies Tubes, where there's just so many. It was so fun just racking your brain trying to think of them and jot them down. So I had to end up with a long list, and as part of that, I started thinking a little bit like what Jen, you were saying, was like, how do they use the Jefferies Tubes? And usually it's like one of two things. Either they're going in there to fix something, or they're using it as a means to get someplace or to hide. So I wanted to make sure my list really included those things. And I did try to make sure they were crawling. Totally fine with the junction scenes as well, because some of mine crisscross into that. But I tried to focus in on really getting into those cramped Jefferies tube corridors. All right, yeah, I'm going to have a lot of secondary systems as per normal. And yeah, it's just so much fun putting these lists together. I love this topic.
Yeah, this one was a lot of fun, because I did the same thing. It's just if I had a spare moment, I let my mind wander and come up with these scenes. It's, oh yeah, that's a great one. Oh yeah. And then sometimes I go back and rewatch and be like, oh, they're actually not in a Jefferies tube. I thought they were. Or this one actually is in a Jefferies tube. That's really cool.
I have one that I thought for sure was going to be on my list, and I ended up not including it because it's not quite a Jefferies tube, but I'll talk about it in secondary.
I had a couple of that too.
Right. Okay, let's do this third Ramadaclon. It's time for the order of things.
I am a Jem'Hadar. He is a Vorta. It is the order of things.
Thank you, third Ramadaclon. And as always, just a quick reminder on how we're going to go through the order of things. First, each of us will reveal our 5-word summary and a hashtag to tease our pick. Then we'll reveal our episode title and then the specific Jefferies tube scene that we're picking, and we'll talk it through. And again, at the end, we'll get some secondary system selections for the picks that just missed our list. And as always, if we have any duplicate picks, make sure you listen for the Defiant Torpedoes. I think we might have some duplicates. We might not. I don't know. This is going to be really interesting. Ken, let's start with you, man. What's your number 5 pick for scenes in a Jefferies tube?
All right. My number 5 pick is one that I don't think will be on anyone else's list. And if it is, I'll be pleasantly surprised. My 5 words are, may I help you, gentlemen? With my hashtag, no. It's Quark and Rom in The Magnificent Ferengi.
Yes.
Spending 5 minutes going through Deep Space Nine's Jefferies Tubes, where Quark has to drop the bomb on Rom that their mother is dating the Grand Nagus.
Yes.
And he freaks out in the corridors, and they get turned around and end up popping out in Sisko's office.
Genius. No, it was definitely on my long list and just part of my secondary systems. I love this pick.
So my favorite part about it, obviously, it's great where they end up, and Avery Brooks gets to play off the Ferengi humor, which really doesn't happen much throughout the series. But I just like how Max Skridenchek as Rom just gets more and more freaked out as the conversation continues, just eventually screaming in Quark's face.
It's superb. It's such a great scene. The length of it, and it's like they intentionally just tried to make it ridiculous, right? They're just going from one corner to the next, having this conversation. It's like almost like Galaxy Quest, where they're just crawling through never-ending corridors.
Yeah, it feels like it takes up about half of the whole first act.
It's really, really brilliant. I love this pick. Jen, how about you on Magnificent Ferengi?
I am so glad you picked this as one of my favorite episodes. It's just hilarious start to finish. And that seems great, especially Sisko's reaction when, they pop out. These funny looking, Ferengi pop out of his office, one head, then the other, and he's just deadpans. Oh, we made a wrong turn. He looks that way. And it's just so funny.
Yeah, it's perfect 5-word summary. Can I help you, gentlemen?
Yeah.
I was following you, brother.
Genius. Absolutely great. Okay, awesome start. Jen, how about you? What's your number 5 pick?
Okay. 5 words in the hashtag. Everything but the kitchen sink. Hashtag technobabble, character growth, romance, and terror. This is Voyager Season 4, Episode 7. It's the cold open to scientific method.
Ooh.
Wonderful pick. This came very close to being on my list.
So good.
This is actually one of my favorite cold opens. I hope you do cold opens someday too.
Yeah, it's on the long list.
But this has everything you could want in a Jefferies Tube scene. It starts out, with Torres and Seven, and there's talking about, engineering. Seven's reconfiguring power couplings and taking away power from what she wants to do, and you get some good engineering back and forth. But then you get the character moment. As early on, Torres is actually really, really doesn't cut Seven any slack at all. And this is actually the first moment that she realizes, she's yelling at Seven, and she realizes that she sounds like Janeway when Janeway was helping Torres, kind of acclimate. And with both of them, Torres is like, well, if I could make it here, then you'll be able to too. And Seven also, she realizes that, okay, I should have asked for permission. She says, I'm sorry. So it's a nice, sweet character moment. And then we're not done. Then Seven leaves and Paris comes in, and it becomes this nice little romantic scene between the two of them. And you think it's just going to end there with them, having a little makeout session. And then flash.
Scanner.
And there's this scanner of their bodies, and it's such a jarring, out of nowhere moment. It just that just really stuck with me. I really just think that was such an interesting way, to open the show, because it's like, what in the hell could that possibly be? What's going on?
I love this pick. I did not think of this one, and I kind of forgot that this was a cold open. It really is super impactful, and that the end of that is really creepy with the with that scanner.
Yeah, because not only do you see their inside, you see their skeletons and everything, but just the alien looking digits that are flashing, just for some reason make it even creepier, because it's like someone's actively watching, versus just like taking a picture, I guess. Oh.
So Ken, this was almost on your list?
Yeah, it came really close. I really have a soft spot for scientific method. It's kind of one of my, I know you did a comfort food episodes.
Yeah, that was our first episode.
Yeah, and it definitely would be on my list for comfort food episodes of Voyager for sure. I just think, the whole episode is great, but that opening sequence tosses you right in the deep end of the pool, and you're not sure where to go from there. So it's a great pick, and almost wish I'd picked it myself.
That's awesome. All right, let's close out round 5 with my number 5 pick, and I'm going to reverse I'll do my hashtag first on this one, so it all flows. Hashtag warning, 5 words, main fusion reactors will overload. And it is DS9 Civil Defense. And so on this one, it's from season 3 of Deep Space Nine, and this is them getting somewhere. It's kind of a small scene, but the production's great, and it's the very end when Sisko and O'Brien are going to crawl through a Jefferies tube, although it's more of an access conduit than a Jefferies tube because it's on Deep Space Nine, to get to the power junction to do some kind of mojo to save the station. And there's a plasma fire, and O'Brien's crawling, and he gets left behind, and Sisko's got to keep going, and Jake's not supposed to come in there, but he crawls in and saves O'Brien. And, of course, Sisko keeps going and saves the day. And I just love this scene. I love the way it's filmed. I love the plasma fire, the smoke. I love when O'Brien just tears off his sleeves and he uses them for his hands. And I don't know, for some reason this stood out to me, and it just feels like the pure Jefferies tube where they're taking off the hats and they have to get somewhere and crawl through it. So, Ken, what's your take on Civil Defense?
Well, I think it's a great episode, and I always enjoy watching it. But, until you started describing it, I didn't remember this episode having any Jefferies tube scenes at all. Right. I mean, right. You think so much of being in the ore processing, or at first I thought perhaps you'd be talking about Jake crawling through the machinery.
Right.
I did forget about the ending, but now as you describe it, I remember it pretty clearly. And, especially Jake getting his chance to save the day for once. At least that part earlier in the series, it's not something they gave him that much to do in terms of the adventure aspect of the series. So that's the one thing I do remember about it. Nice little highlight for Jake there.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons I picked it too. And it's kind of an early O'Brien Must Suffer episode, since he's about to get burned alive in a plasma fire. Jen, how about you?
Yeah, that moment for Jake, it's like he is Sisko's son. That was not that there's any doubt about it. He's shown courage before, but like that was the first moment that it was like, yeah, chip off the old block. But Civil Defense is such a great episode, and there's so many great moments. That scene is so dramatic, right. And I love a good plasma fire too. So. Yeah,
the plasma fire, the way they filmed it, is what always stood out to me. And I like Sisko at the end when he's like moving. Oh, we got a cat. Hi, yeah, that's instant gravy. Buddy. So I like when Sisko at the end is he's like moving isolinear chips around, and he just does it just in time. He like throws one in the air and catches it and breathes a sigh of relief. It's just super cool.
Yeah,
I love that whole scene. All right, enough of that. Let's move on to round 4. And Ken, what's your number 4 pick for scenes in a Jefferies tube?
All right, so my number 4 pick is a little outside the box, but I think you'll be okay with it here, Jim. My 5 words are little ships with big tubes, and my hashtag is bigger on the inside. This is a combination pick of 2 episodes. Ooh. Blaze of Glory from Deep Space Nine's 5th season, and Collective from Voyager's 6th season. Now, you may say, what do these 2 episodes have in common? They're very different. I will tell you, Blaze of Glory is the first and, if I remember correctly, only time we get to see the Jefferies tube inside a runabout. And Collective is the only time we see a Jefferies tube inside the Delta Flyer. So it's these small ships that you wouldn't expect to have Jefferies tube size crawlways inside them, and these episodes revealed them for the first time.
I love this theme, a theme pick. Fantastic. Right. So Blaze of Glory was on my secondary systems because I've actually talked about it a few times. And I know at some point episodes ago, joked about that might be on my list for scenes in a Jefferies tube whenever we get to it. It's not, but I did think about it. So wait, so remind me about Collective when they were in the Jefferies tube.
So Collective is the episode that introduced the Borg children.
Yeah, because it's where Harry Kim was lost in there. That's why they didn't find him, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
So these are the only episodes that revealed that the small secondary ships on the 2 shows actually had Jefferies tube crawlways in them as well. We think of these ships as being relatively small and cramped because we generally only see, especially in the runabout, we generally only see the cockpit area. And the Delta Flyer, we spend most of the time in the front half of the ship. But they're really supposed to be a couple of dozen meters long in real life, so to speak. So there has to be some sort of access to the built-in warp systems and everything comes with them. So you don't see them often, but finally get to see them here in these episodes.
And you're saying it's not only the first time, but the only time?
As far as I know, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, okay. I love it. That's fantastic. We love to educate and inform here on TrekRanks, and that's what Ken just did. Jen, what's your take on this?
Well, anyway, you can squeeze in more episodes. The Trek is good by me, so that
yep.
I like that theme. I didn't even remember that part of Collective that Harry was hiding in there. But Blaze of Glory is one of my favorites too. The memorable part of that scene for me is that I swear Eddington drove the ship in a way that Sisko would hit his head on purpose.
Of course he did.
Of course he did. He takes a pretty big hit on the head.
Right.
It's pretty funny.
That is classic. Love that theme pick. That might be a TrekRanks first where we have a theme like that. So take note, future TrekRanks participants. Jen, what's your round 4 pick?
Okay. Deck 13 the hard way. # we will repeat this exercise tomorrow evening.
Yes.
Voyager Season 1, Episode 16. It's the Jefferies Tube workout in Learning Curve.
Learning Curve. I love it. It's not on my secondary systems, too. There's so many.
There's so many.
That's a great pick.
I just love that. It's kind of like Star Trek's version of a training montage in a movie. Even the music is kind of like that. You get some good Tuvok moments. His signature sarcasm. Crewman Hemley complains. She's like, we have to crawl through, 50 Jefferies tubes to do that. And he's like, oh, he compliments her on her knowledge of the ship's design, instead of acknowledging that she's just complaining.
Right.
It's a clever use of the Jefferies tubes. It's a lot of fun. It's also a great idea for a workout.
You could not summarize it any better than your 5 words summary. Deck 13 the hard way. I love that. I knew exactly what you're talking about. It's classic Tuvok.
It is.
Ken, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, that's on the top of my Voyager secondary systems list for this topic for sure. And, it's a good example of one of the more creative ways that the directors of the shows would film that Jefferies Tube set, because that whole sequence inside the tube is filmed from behind the ladder, essentially where the wall of the ladder would be. So you're looking through the rungs. It's a little bit of a production trick. They simply remove the wall for the camera to shoot through, but it gives a different perspective on that junction set as well.
Yeah,
that's a great shot.
That's an excellent point. It makes you feel like you're going through the workout with them too. Especially when they stop in the middle to complain, wish Tuvok death.
I just like Tuvok, not that way.
Right.
I'm just thinking about when he tells Chell he's got to keep running more laps. It's so great.
The one that he turned up the gravity to make it harder for everybody too.
So great. Get the cheese to sickbay. Learning Curve has just made an appearance on TrekRanks. So, all right, my round 4 pick is my 5 words and a hashtag. Henchman Death by Jefferies Tube, #Baryon Sweep. And of course, it is TNG Starship Mine from season 6 of Next Generation. It's number 14 for me at TrekRanks, one of my favorite episodes. And this is when Picard is escaping through the Jefferies Tube. And I'll say first that, it's an awesome episode. Obviously, everyone loves it. The diehard on the Enterprise. And so right away when we hit on this topic, I zeroed in on this episode because I remember there's so many great Jefferies Tube scenes in this episode. And I especially love when Jean-Luc cuts the rungs off the ladder and he kind of taunts the terrorist by saying that, there are only so many ways to 10 forward. I love that moment. But my pick for the top scene is one of the coolest deaths in Star Trek history. And for sure, someday we're going to do top 5 deaths on Star Trek. So that's on the long list too. But I love this scene when Picard's trying to get away from this random terrorist henchman, and he sees the Baryon sweep coming behind the hatch, and they actually cut the commercial, then they come back, and the terrorist, who was played by Tim DeZarn, who was actually at STLV this year and spoke for the first time I'd seen that actor, and he was awesome. He was a really interesting guy. And he's crawling after Picard, and then he opens the hatch, and boom, the Baryon sweeps right there in his face. And I love that moment. It always stuck with me. I think it's a pretty cool death and a great use of the Jefferies Tube. Jen, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, and the look on Picard's face when it happens, because he
didn't
want to kill anyone, but he knew he had to do that to survive.
You can hear him screaming. He's walking through the corridor, and you can hear the guy scream, and he's like, ugh, too bad.
Yeah, I love that. I love this pick. The terrorists taking over the Enterprise would have been a hard enough challenge for Picard, to save the Enterprise, but then adding the difficulty of the Baryon sweep, like making the ship shorter and shorter, basically. Turning around and using that as a weapon was really innovative, I thought.
And one of the reasons it's such a great episode.
Yeah, so good.
Ken, what's your take on this pick?
Well, I definitely reviewed Starship Mine in preparation for today's episode, but it didn't make my secondary systems. Definitely has some good moments, like you mentioned, with the ladders being cut.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is a pretty good death for a random henchman. I remember when I was younger, I never understood how Picard could escape through a hole in the floor and still have his jacket cover the hole in the floor. But
well, it's pretty obvious. He cut a small hole just big enough to go through, and then put his jacket over it. Ken, no nitpicking.
That's right. I know. There's no nitpicking here. I was young, and I was, I didn't know any better. Now it's a great episode, and I love it, Jim.
I'm totally kidding. I love it. Meanwhile, Ken does not have any issue with Quark and Rom and an access tunnel right behind Sisko's office for security purposes.
Hey, that's Odo's problem, not mine.
I love the challenges of nitpicking. All right, let's go to the soup round. Ken, what's your round 3 pick?
All right, my round 3 pick, my 5 words are, we have an opportunity here, with a hashtag, a great disappointment. This is episode 425 of Deep Space Nine, Broken Link, where Worf finds Garak trying to commandeer the Defiant's torpedoes to obliterate the Great Link from orbit.
Oh, it's a great...
And they get in a big fight.
Yes.
So, it's Garak's attempt to take revenge for what happened in the Diaz cast and the trying to really, get rid of the Great Link before the Dominion can take over the Alpha Quadrant, even knowing that the Defiant would be killed and everyone on board. And then he and Worf get in this great big fist fight inside the Jefferies Tube conduit space. It's really the first time after a season of Worf really, it's his first year on the station and really having a lot of distrust for Garak, finally seeing what he thinks are his suspicions come true. And, from a production point of view, one of the things I've always liked about this is that during their fight, one of the spots when Garak gets tossed into the wall, one of the hatches to one of the Jefferies Tube crawlways actually gets knocked off the set. And you can see the empty stage and some tables behind them off what normally would be hidden from screen. So you actually get to see behind the set during the fight sequence.
Oh, I did not know that. I'm going to have to look for that.
And the best part is the Foley artist actually gave that hatch being knocked off the set its own audio, so you can hear it clattering to the floor off stage.
That's really cool. That I did not think of this one at all, probably because there was no crawling involved. But I love this pick. It's a major moment. I remember when this happened, I thought, is Garak going to be off the show? Because that's going to be hard to come back from. But they handled that very nicely, with him serving some time. Jen, what's your take on this one?
You fight well for a tailor.
That's it, exactly.
I'm kind of bummed I didn't think of that. That's a really good pick.
Super cool. Great moment for sure. All right, Jen, what's your soup round pick?
Oh, okay, my soup round pick. Just your good pal Julian. Hashtag not bad for an extension course.
Oh.
It's Deep Space Nine, Season 3, Episode 26. It's a changeling fools O'Brien in The Adversary.
Yep. Great pick. How did I not think of this one? Oh my gosh.
This is just such a wonderful episode, and I just love how this scene fits in with the mystery of the episode and makes you suspect Julian and misdirects you. Their suspense. It starts out with O'Brien just, repairing something in the Jefferies Tube and the Defiant, and hears the noise. And I really love the production values in this scene too. I love the ominous music, but also there's some really good shots of the Jefferies Tube. There's one shot, one sublime shot of a long, dark, empty Jefferies Tube, and just forces you to look at this empty space, and then, bam, he turns around and there's Changeling Julian. We don't know Changeling Julian. I think it's just Julian, and they do something. Like O'Brien does a really good job of being startled, and I also love that O'Brien then checks his work.
Right.
It's not bad for an extension course, and I think that's a really nice moment of foreshadowing, because I don't know if our Julian would be able to wire something up that good. So I think that's once you go, but it gets even better once you know the rest of the episode.
I love this pick. I can't believe I didn't think of it. Note to self: watch Soup Round picks, Broken Link and Adversary tonight, because those are two awesome picks. And you're so right about the production quality of that one. It's not only the shots, but just the way it was put together. It was really ominous, and something creepy is going on, but you're not quite sure what. But Julian has been changed into a changeling for the first time.
For the first time, yes.
Ken, what's your take?
Well, yeah, Adversary really is a great episode, and the paranoia that just builds throughout the whole thing up until the reveal at the end, that it's Krasinski who's really the changeling, at least revealed in person as the changeling, is something that it's a good narrative structure. I had totally forgotten about that entire scene between O'Brien and I guess the imposter, Bashir, until you mentioned it, Jenn. But yeah, I remember it just being, just a big question with really not knowing what the heck's going on. And eventually we do find that Bashir is locked in his quarters, and that's the answer to that question.
It's an awesome pick. And so let's close out the soup round, and we still don't have a duplicate. I had a feeling that might happen with such a broad canvas. So we'll see how the next two rounds go. But we won't have a duplicate on this pick, because I, spoiler alert, am going old school on this pick. And my 5 words and a hashtag: try her now, Mr. Kyle. Hashtag the OG Jefferies Tube. It is the Doomsday Machine from season 2, episode 2 of the original series. One of my all-time favorite episodes. And it's the scene where Scotty saves the day by beaming Kirk back just in time. And to go with my theme of either going somewhere or fixing something, this is Scotty fixing something in a Jefferies Tube. And honestly, it's one of the most exciting scenes, I think, in Star Trek history, is the conclusion of the Doomsday Machine, when Kirk's kind of waiting to get beamed off the ship at the very last second. And I think what is not always really remembered is that I think the big star of this scene really is the Jefferies Tube. So while Kirk's on the ship saying, "Gentlemen, I suggest you beam me aboard," I just love the Scotty, who's the big hero at the end, climbing in and out of the diagonal Jefferies Tube, the old school original series Jefferies Tube that I love, that just opens up into the corridor. And he's just, messing with stuff, and they try it once, and he says that you better beam it back right now or it's not going to work. And of course he has to wait like 30 seconds. They try it. It doesn't work. He climbs back up, fixes it again, and he hops down and says, "Try her now, Mr. Kyle." I just love that moment. I love the design of those original Jefferies Tubes. And I knew going in I was going to have something with Scotty, and may even have more, but we'll see. How about you, Ken? What do you think about that one?
Well, I think it's good that the original series is represented here. I don't have any original series moments in my list, only because, while there are some minor moments like this one you're describing, the Jefferies Tube was always kind of the same, from my remembrance of it. Not a lot of different camera work or really a lot of different presentations. Sparks flying today, lightning a little bit next time. It really is a neatly designed set. I've had a chance to visit the set tour recreation up in upstate New York, which does have the corridor and the Jefferies Tube recreation that was originally in the used for fan film production. And it, when you're actually sitting at the bottom of that Jefferies Tube, it's a lot steeper and a lot more to it than it feels like watching some of the old original series episodes. So you get a nice perspective on it. But yeah, I'm glad it got an appearance here on tonight's episode.
Well, that's the main reason I want to go to that Trek Ticonderoga to see that Jefferies Tube. That's so cool. I love it. Jen, how about you? What's your take on this one?
Yeah, I'm glad Scotty's on this list. I'm glad those very interesting diagonal tubes are on the list. But similarly to what Ken said, when I think of the original series in the Jefferies Tube, I think of them just like moving little pieces of things around.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's why they're so awesome.
So it's more just like fun for me to watch as opposed to like being in the moment. Kind of puts me in the fact that we're watching 60s technology, which is a lot of fun. So I'm glad it's on the list.
I just always wanted one in my house. I can just crawl up. And there's just so I like that it's so that right there, just in the middle of the corridor. You just there it is. Let's climb up. So I'm actually in my secondary system. Spoiler alert! I'm going to talk about another original series Jefferies Tube that's going to challenge what you guys said about them all being the same. So
I think I know which one you're talking about. I think that might be on mine too.
Oh, okay.
My secondary system.
One of the things that I really do like about that original series Jefferies Tube set is Nichelle Nichols actually got a chance to pose inside that set for her own cover story on a pretty great image. She had to be on the cover of Ebony magazine in 1967.
Yep.
With her posing inside the Jefferies Tube set. It's a really dramatic shot. And that's one thing I always remember that set for. I have a copy of that magazine that she was kind enough to sign for me at a convention a couple of years ago. So it's that's the one Jefferies Tube memory I have is her on that magazine cover.
I know exactly what picture you're talking about, and it is awesome. Okay, let's jump into round 2. Ken, what's your number 2 pick?
My number 2 pick, the 5 words are, I didn't order any fruit. The hashtag is Area 51. This is Deep Space Nine once more, episode 604, Behind the Lines, where Rom has to sneak into the weapon systems inside the Deep Space Nine crawlways to prevent the Dominion from taking down the minefield that's blocking the wormhole.
Yep.
It's a short scene. It's probably maybe less than a minute of screen time, but because Odo gets so distracted by the female changeling, the plan goes awry. He has to try to make a quick escape and ends up being captured by the Cardassian occupation. Part of my favorite things about this scene are, one, Max Grodénchik takes a running dive head first into the crawlway space in full Ferengi makeup and somehow manages to get all the way up to his feet in one swoop, and then of course leading to the big fight between Kira and Odo at the end of the episode.
Yeah, because
he wasn't there to cover their tracks when they needed him most.
I love it. And again, not to spoiler alert, on my secondary system I have like kind of the sequel to this in Sacrifice of Angels, when him and Kira are in the conduit space and trying to once again save them from shutting down the minefield, and they're just a second too late. I thought about this one too as well. So Jen, how about you on Behind the Lines?
Oh, this one didn't occur to me. It's
brief.
This is a really good pick though. I love the idea of Rom as this very, very even above competent engineer. That's just such a great piece of character development for him, and especially in this because he's part of the resistance on DS9, and that's such a good pick.
Yeah, it is a brief scene, but it really builds to the next 2 to 3 episodes of conflict between the resistance group there on the station.
Yeah, it's pivotal. It's really critical. And he ends up in the holding cell. All right, Jen, how about you? What's your round 2 pick?
Okay, my round 2 pick. You have very steady hands. Hashtag, he's just not that into you. This is Deep Space Nine, Season 3, Episode 15. It's the cross-cultural misunderstanding and destiny.
Ooh, interesting.
So this is a personal favorite episode of mine. This is the one where there's the 2 female Cardassian engineers come on the station for a joint mission into the Gamma Quadrant to set up a communications relay. And one of them misunderstands O'Brien's attitude towards her, I guess you could say. Throughout the whole episode, you see her being very horrible to O'Brien the whole time. This is one she's prejudiced against male engineers, basically, and they, which is I find very interesting because she seems so ridiculous because we know how great an engineer O'Brien is, and I think that helps maybe show about how ridiculous it is to have prejudice in the other direction.
Yep.
Because we know how amazing he is, and this should be obvious. And she's just a ridiculous character. You know, she asked him to get her tea, you know. But this scene is really special to me. This is really important to me because it takes it that one step farther in subverting the sexual harassment trope. Because on the surface, it's really funny. Like, you know, they can make it funny because they have that excuse of Cardassians and humans flirt in different ways. So it's a funny misunderstanding, but it also shows things that really do happen in 2 women who are involved in male dominated industries like engineering. She takes everything he says as a come on. She literally checks out his ass when they're in the Jefferies Tube. And then at the end of the scene, she gets mad at him, even though she was the one in the wrong, and storms off. And this is what happens. These sort of things are what happens. And trying to show it in a funny way, showing how ridiculous she looks, I think kind of is a way to palpably show that they have the cultural difference excuse. We don't have that. This episode means a lot to me. And that scene in particular is just...
I like the way you said that it subverts it. I mean, it literally flips it on its head and shows you it can happen when it happens the other direction, and just how awful it is, really.
And it's so funny. It really is, because he's just like, I'm not even remotely interested in you whatsoever. You know, and she gets offended by that, and it's just it's so well acted.
And the fact that she had been so dismissive of him.
Yes.
Throughout the whole episode. So.
And that's what's important about her character, because that happens. It flips just like that. The man who's like that, you know, 95% of the people you're not going to have a trouble with. I'm not saying, you know, that this happens all the time, but that person who is going to dismiss you, who's going to ask you to bring him coffee, that man is then the next time you see him can flip like that and then say, oh, O'Brien stands up for himself. And then in the next scene, she assumes that he was flirting with her.
Yeah.
These things, it's just so deep and so well done. And I love that scene.
That's great. Ken, what's your take on that one?
I could provide you many children, but frankly, I think you're getting ahead of yourself.
Exactly. She's so ridiculous, you know?
Yeah.
She's so ridiculous.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I've always just found it as, you know, a funny misunderstanding. But, you know, your perspective on it, Jen, is really, really interesting. It's really deeper read of the scene than I guess I may have ever given it thought. And so, you know, it's a welcome perspective to hear that sort of analysis of, you know, what on the surface is just, you know, a funny misunderstanding. The one thing that I remember mostly about this sequence is it's Tracy Scoggins as Galora, who's the Cardassian scientist. It's one of the few during the height of what some saw as a feud, the height of the Deep Space Nine Babylon 5 conflict, with her coming over from the Babylon 5 series from her role in that show.
Oh, that's right.
Well, let's close out round 2 with my number 2 pick. And I am going back to TNG. My 5 words and a hashtag. Needs of many outweigh data's head. Hashtag self-contained neural nets. It is Disaster from season 5 of TNG. And it's the scene where Data and Riker need to go to engineering, so they need to get somewhere. And they use Data's body as a conduit to be able to pass through a Jefferies tube that's obstructed. This is an amazing scene that I like this scene because I always think of it as, for me, it really highlighted how writers on TNG and really all the subsequent Trek, at this point, they kind of realize there's really no limits to the stories they want to tell. And I could just literally imagine the writers in the writers' room thinking, all right, they're trapped in the Jefferies tube and they need some kind of conduit to clear the way. Oh, we'll use Data's body and then we'll just take his head off and take it to engineering. And I love that because it's such an out there idea, such a great sci-fi conceit that you have the ability to do that. And they write a little technobabble, and it's an awesome scene. The effects are awesome. Data's matter-of-fact delivery of all of his lines where he's realizing it's the best option and explaining it to Riker, and Riker's like, okay, yeah, I guess it's our best option. So that's a Ronald D. Moore script disaster.
Data, there's 500,000 amps going through that arc. Could your body handle that much current?
The power surge would cause a systems failure in my internal processors and melt my primary power couplings. However, there is a chance that the damage would not be irreparable.
No.
Commander, our options are very limited.
First of all, android or not, I wouldn't ask anyone to take that kind of risk. Second, if the computer is not working in engineering, I'm going to need your help to get control of the ship.
My positronic brain has several layers of shielding to protect me from power surges. It would be possible for you to remove my cranial unit and take it with you.
Let me get this straight. You want me to take off your head?
Yes, sir. Is something wrong, sir?
Well, Data, would you be all right?
My memory core and neural nets are self-contained. I would be fine, sir.
Like you said, our options are limited.
Love that episode and love that moment. I think it's pretty quintessential Jefferies Tube moment. Jen, what's your take on that one?
That's a great episode. I definitely consider that one too. It's on my secondary systems. The thing that I really enjoy about that is that sometimes when they write a technobabble explanation for what they want to do, sometimes you could tell that it's just something they want to do, so they make up some kind of technobabble. But the technobabble they actually use to justify it pretty much checks out. And that's kind of funny to me. It's just like, yeah, I can kind of see that. Okay, I'm on board. It's a great episode.
Yeah, totally agree. Ken, how about you?
A remarkable experience.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, removing Data's cranial unit does give the rest of the episode, where everything is pretty much crisis all the time, some really good comedy moments between him and Riker when Riker's trying to run the ship off Data's head. But it was definitely my secondary systems list, but it didn't quite make the cut for my final countdown.
No, I get it. I just kept moving it down my list. I really like that scene, and I like the banter between the Data and Riker in that one. It's serious and it's technobabble, but it's also kind of lighthearted and the crazy. I mean, Riker's just kind of exasperated by, okay, I'm gonna carry your head to engineering. Got it. That's the plan we're going with. All right, let's go to round one. Ken, what's your number one scene in a Jefferies tube?
All right. Well, my number one pick here isn't a single scene. It's something that's been part of many a Jefferies tube sequence from about the middle of TNG all the way through the end of Voyager.
Okay.
And it's something that always catches my eye. And it's something I've come to love. So there's no nitpicking here, Jim, I promise.
Is this the forced perspective?
My 5 words are no CGI in the 90s. Hashtag a matter of perspective. It is the Jefferies Tube set extension.
Yes, I predicted it. It is the forced perspective of the Jefferies Tube sets, which are awesome. But Ken, talk about it. I love it.
So, in modern television these days, if a set is meant to stretch on for a long distance. Oftentimes these days it's not actually built in the studio. On Discovery, for example, the shuttle bay that was shown a few times in the first season is a small construction, mostly extended out to a full room with CGI. Even on Voyager in the later days when we'd see the shuttle bay, that was mostly a CG set with actors standing in the foreground. But back in the early 1990s, that really wasn't an option. So, in feature films where the budget was a little more expansive, sets were able to be built with some forced perspective construction where it would physically get smaller over a short distance to give the illusion of depth. In the motion picture, for example, the extension of the warp engine, the horizontal parts of the Enterprise warp engine, was essentially, it was a cone-shaped set with materials and everything else getting smaller, including actors that were of smaller stature to stand further back to create the illusion of depth in the long distance. But on the Next Generation, obviously time and budget were limits there. And for broadcast television that wasn't meant to be seen in high definition like we view it today, a static still photograph of a long Jefferies tube was used to be put in the background of many of these scenes to create the illusion that the Jefferies tubes really would stretch on for long distances inside the Enterprise. The image that was used, really looking closely at it, I believe it was a photo printed on a piece of flat backing that was inserted at the edge of the set. It was first used, you could briefly see it in the game in season 5, but the first clear usage of it was in Power Play later in that same season. Right. And it was used pretty well. The color matched the lighting in the set at that time. It represented the same textures and patterns that the Jefferies Tube set was built from. So it was a pretty good job to line up with what television viewers would see in the foreground. But the same image was used over and over throughout the next several years, even as the Jefferies Tube set lighting and colors would change. It was used all the way through Voyager, as late as Voyager Season 6, when the sets were very different. And it was even used once or twice in Deep Space Nine, where we're supposed to fill in the back of the Cardassian conduits, but it was still a photo of the Enterprise Jefferies Tube sets.
And it always looked awesome.
That's right. And the great thing about it, especially in the remasters of the Next Generation, it's really become more obvious in its use in a way that I like. It's really something that's just one of the hallmarks of the show in the scenes and these sets these days. It'll be right behind an actor, and it'll give the illusion that the Jefferies tube veers off at 45-degree angle for some reason, right, or downhill
it's
or
going
uphill,
yeah,
where the camera placement is. But my favorite usage of it has to be in Lessons, where it's a brightly lit, close-up view of the wall of the Jefferies tube junction box where Nella, Darren, and Picard are having their little concert. And it honestly looks like somebody printed out a photo and taped it to the wall, because it's way off. The perspective is totally sideways, but it's one of the things that I love about revisiting the series now in high definition, is being able to see that production work that clearly was not meant to be viewed that way, but now it's part of the nostalgia of the series and the production.
Well, the forced perspective stuff is part of the fabric of Trek. Like you said, it was in the engineering set. It was right there in the cage, where they had the long hallway that narrowed down, and it's even I love that J.J. Abrams even used it in 2009. The shot of Kirk running into the cave in 2009 on Delta Vega. That's a little kid running into a cave.
Yep.
So if you didn't know that, watch for that, because it's a little kid running. It's the trick of the camera. I love this pick. Of course, TrekCore would make this pick. It's a deep, deep cut and part of the, like I said, the fabric of Trek. Jenn, any take on forced perspective?
No, well, I actually learned something. That was very interesting. And also my number one pick uses this. So
awesome. I'll say one more, Kent. My favorite force perspective, I've tweeted this before because it's hilarious, is in Coming of Age. It's the scene where
I know exactly what you're talking about.
One of the many scenes where Wesley's in the hallway talking to the Admiral dude and the guy with the webbed hands. It literally looks like Wile E. Coyote painted a door on the end of the hallway. This is classic. Okay,
it's great.
Let's move on. Jen, what's your number one pick?
Yeah. Okay, my number one pick. Don't care who you ship. Hashtag they make beautiful music together. Next Generation, Season 6, Episode 19, the Jefferies Tube duet in Lessons.
People are going to be so happy that you picked this because I'm sure people because I'm not picking it, but I'm glad somebody picked it. It's great.
I had to. I wasn't planning on it until I rewatched it.
Right. It's really good.
And then, I don't think it matters, who you prefer for Picard here, but if you don't get, choked up when he starts playing that melody from the inner light and you're made of stone. And that's what did it for me. That's what pushed it over the top. Otherwise, it's just, still a lovely moment. But him playing that song makes this scene not about her at all. It's just about Picard.
Yes.
Being able to open up. And it's a wonderful shorthand for us, to know how Nella Darren has made him feel like he can open up. It's just so lovely. And they do use that that forced perspective, and they pan out, and they're framed so lovely.
It's so emotional and powerful.
It is. I just love it. And I love how it extends, to Geordi and engineering, and he hears them, and then the music stops, and then we get to see why the music stops, and it's everything about that scene is just so lovely,
Yep. I'm glad you said that. I forgot about that with Geordi. That's awesome. Ken, other than the force perspective, what's your take on Lessons?
Well, yeah, I really love this scene, and that's why I wanted to make sure I at least mentioned it in my number one pick, even though it was a little tangential. Yeah. But it's the most acoustically perfect spot on the ship. So I always love the music aspect and just the sound design of the piano and the flute echoing through the ship. It really creates a great resonance to the sound, and their duet is probably one of my favorite musical moments in the franchise right there. So it's one I'll just jump into that episode for 2 minutes just to watch that scene once in a while.
Yeah, brilliant pick. All right, let's close it up with my number one pick for a scene in a Jefferies Tube. My 5 words and a hashtag. Chronoton torpedo pierces Jefferies Tube. Hashtag temporal variance is 1.47. And it is Year of Hell from Voyager Season 4. One of the all-time great episodes of Trek. It's number 14 for me on my Voyager TrekRanks. And it's the scene where Seven and Tuvok face off against a Krenim Chronoton torpedo lodged in a starboard Jefferies Tube. And it's just a cool scene. It'd be cool enough if it was standing on its own, just as a torpedo lodged in the side of the ship. But the fact that this scene was previewed in the previous season and before and after when Kes found the torpedo when she was kind of moving forward through time was just so cool, so well done. I love the drama in this scene. Again, it starts with when the Seven discovers the torpedo and Tuvok says, "Don't do anything until I arrive." And she's scanning it and just says, "Arrive quickly." Love that moment.
7 of 9 to Tuvok.
Tuvok here.
There is an undetonated Chronoton torpedo lodged in the starboard Jefferies Tube on deck 11, section 2. The warhead is still active.
Do not attempt to disarm it. Hold your position and wait for my arrival. Is that clear?
Arrive quickly.
I love when Tuvok gets there and Seven realizes that she can get this temporal variance that can help save the ship in their fight against the Krenim. And Tuvok's like, nope, we're getting out of here. And then he ends up protecting her when it explodes, and he's blind, and it's just all a big thing. I love everything about this moment, and I especially love that it ties back to before and after. Really, really nice piece of continuity for Voyager there. Ken, what's your take on this one?
Yeah, that's a good choice. It's one that I considered when I was making my list here. I think the physical production of the sequence is really interesting. The torpedo looks great.
Super cool.
Smoke everywhere. You can tell it's a really hazardous space for the characters to be in. Our friend the Force perspective photo is in the background. But, for me, I liked it in the context of the episode, but personally, I always found that while it was previewed in before and after, which I grant you is a good point, I always felt that they should have known about it because of before and after. The characters, I mean, with the way that previous episode had ended.
So I used to think that, but because it happened in her future, I guess she was aware of it, but I guess she didn't write it down, and she was pissed because she had to leave the ship. So
yeah, I suppose that's all. So we can wave it away with any explanation we want.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
But it works well, and it's really an interesting sort of substitution to swap in 7 for the adventure we saw Kes have previously.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, but the production quality on that torpedo is just really cool, really, really high level for these guys. Jen, how about you on Year of Hell?
Yeah, I'm always willing to suspend any kind of disbelief for a good time travel yarn like that. So that never bothered me about the before and after, and then Year of Hell. That's actually the episode I thought you were talking about before you said the title, because
right.
There were some interesting scenes there with her in the Jefferies Tube also, of her finally getting the temporal variance, that she needed. But yeah, what's there to say that Year of Hell is amazing. Yeah, good pick.
Yeah, and again, I said it, but I love that Tuvok gets blinded in that scene. It's obviously a big part of the rest of Year of Hell in part 2. All right, so let's get some secondary systems here before we get to our regeneration cycle. Ken, want to rattle off a few extra picks?
Yeah, so I had a number of picks from a lot of this different series. Starting with Enterprise, I came very close to including the introduction to Travis Mayweather in the sweet spot in Broken Bow.
Sweet spot.
Me too.
The variable gravity area there in the middle of the ship. I also almost included Hoshi's crawl through the ventilation systems in Shockwave Part 2.
Yeah.
I figured that was pretty close for the NX class to a Jefferies Tube.
Yep.
As well as Archer being blown out into space from the Cold Station 12 Jefferies Tubes in the Augments.
Yes, that's another good one.
From Next Generation, I came very close to including the quality of life, where Data realizes the exocomps are sentient.
Great pick. I didn't think of that. Yes.
From DS9, I had so many DS9 picks, but I still had more that I almost had on my list. I have The Siege, where the crew was bonding over their complaints about combat rations.
That's on my list.
That's right.
Yep.
The Assignment, where O'Brien recruits Rom for his secret mission, where he promises not to even tell them his name, even though everyone knows Rom's name. Voyager, there were a couple of good ones that I was surprised no one picked. We had the death of Harry Kim in Deadlock, being sucked into space from a Jefferies tube.
Yep.
The EMH Mark II trying to crawl into a Jefferies tube backwards from Message in a Bottle. And a little scene that I, just kind of stumbled across when I was doing a rewatch last week was from the opening moments of Course Oblivion, where at that point, the crew still thought they were our Voyager crew. And Seven was explaining to B'Elanna how she wanted to stay single and play the field rather than get married, as they crawled through the Jefferies tubes to see what was wrong with the ship.
And is that where the rice, you could see the rice too going through?
Yep, that's where they first uncovered the problem.
Yeah. All right, that's an awesome list. A bunch of good mentions there. I've still got a few more. Jen, how about you?
You mentioned one of mine in your history, the Jefferies Tube, because I had to give a special honorable mention to that dead Telluride master shoved halfway into that diagonal Jefferies Tube.
I love that.
The Journey to Babel, because that image has stuck with me since I was a little kid.
Dead Telluride in the Jefferies Tube.
So he had to get a mention. Voyager's worst case scenario.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, when the plasma extinguisher that they need just appears out of nowhere.
Yep.
When they're stuck in the program and they realize that they have help from the outside.
Such a great pick.
Yeah, also I had Broken Bow. I had Twisted. So that's the one where Janeway's arm gets stuck into the structural flux is a good one. Someone to Watch Over Me is the one where Seven asked somebody on a date. He's working in the Jefferies Tube.
That's right.
That's a great pick. That was actually Dan from our last episode. I teased him. He mentioned that. It was a really smart pick.
Yeah. So I didn't put that on my list because it was mentioned already, but I always thought that one was clever. Relativity.
Oh, yeah.
That's right.
When they figure out who was the bad guy, and it was, Future.
And just that cool temporal device or whatever he had.
Yeah, that was cool.
That super unique prop that we've never seen anywhere else.
Right. Nowhere else. Acquisition, which when Trip ran you through a wild goose chase around the ship to get to the quote unquote vault.
Oh,
I forgot all about that.
That's such a good one. I would not have thought of that. Yep.
I think you mentioned all of mine. Oh, we talked about an original series one, That Which Survived.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That was going to be the one.
Okay. I'll let you talk about that.
Well, I was going to say, because it's not a standard Jefferies tube, right? It's horizontal. And first of all, I love when the two guys pick them up and slide them in. So they slide them in head first. But I love this scene so much. I love the static that's at the end of the Jefferies tube, or it's a more of a maintenance crawl way they call it, I think. Right. With the blue electric lights, and I just
Borealis in here.
Yeah, exactly. And there's so many great Scotty lines like, "I know what time it is. I don't need a blooming cuckoo clock." And he's basically playing a game of Operation with this wrench that he's got to reach into the hole without touching anything on the side. And then Spock says reverse the polarity, and he's just got to change out the thing on the end, but it's stuck. And he's
why is the thing not coming out?
Yeah, right. And then the other thing I love about this is they talk about the jettison the pod, from Court Martial. Yeah. And he's like, jettison the pod. I'm dead anyway. Oh, I really, really wanted to include this. So
and Spock's in rare form too, with his don't need nonsense, Scotty. Just do it.
That whole episode, Spock is super caustic.
It is, yeah.
It's like third season caustic Spock, where they're just play it up. Who cares? I really, really wanted to pick that. So that was probably my toughest cut. I have a couple others that haven't been mentioned. A lot of those were on my list, like the Circle trilogy, Blaze of Glory. Magnificent Ferengi. But so I wanted to include Lon Suter from Meld. You never really see him too much in the Jefferies tube, but I just love the thought when he first shows up, he crawls out of the Jefferies tube. And I just love thinking about him crawling around up there and eluding the Kazon. Not Meld, in Basics, of course.
That's right.
When he's basically saving the ship. So I love the thought of Lon Suter crawling around Jefferies tubes to save Voyager.
Thoron particles. That's an old Moxie trick. Holding tricorders.
Perfect. And then I mentioned it at the beginning because it's the first ever episode to talk about Jefferies tubes. And I love The Hunted. It was actually one of my comfort food episodes. I love Roga Danar. And I ended up not picking it because it was really kind of a brief scene where he's walking through a kind of a tall Jefferies tube and he hides the phaser, but wanted to give that episode a shout out. And then my last one, I'm just going to say special shout out to Discovery for two great Jefferies tube scenes. I love Context is for Kings is easily my favorite Discovery episode, and I love the scene at the end where Burnham's racing through the Jefferies Tube on the Glen, and she's trying to escape the tardigrade, and she's quoting Alice in Wonderland. I just think that's really well done. And then I love in what's past as prologue when she actually escapes through a Jefferies Tube to get out of the clutches of the Emperor, and then she ends up kind of a little bit of a cat and mouse chase through the Jefferies Tubes when Lorca's trying to find her. So very, very cool.
I did have one other secondary system pick that I was surprised that no one else mentioned. It was from Star Trek First Contact when Lily and Picard have their face-off, and Picard reveals that they're in orbit.
How did I forget that? Yeah, that's great. Really,
that was probably number 6 or 7 on my 5 character or 5 episode list. I just couldn't find a place for it.
Yeah, that's a great one. Okay, that was amazing, and as expected, I kind of knew this was going to be a great topic with a lot of cool deep cut picks. So let's move into our regeneration cycle so we can wind this episode down.
Computer, activate regeneration cycle. Alcoves beta and gamma.
All right, let's run through a quick recap of our picks. Ken, run down your top 5.
All right, my number 5 pick was Deep Space Nine's The Magnificent Ferengi with Quark and Rom in the Jefferies Tubes of Deep Space Nine. My number 4 pick was a combination of Deep Space Nine's Blaze of Glory and Voyager's Collective, revealing Jefferies Tubes in both runabouts and the Delta Flyer. My number 3 pick was Deep Space Nine's Broken Link, with Worf and Garak fighting in the Defiance Jefferies Tube crawl space. My number 2 pick was Deep Space Nine's Behind the Lines, where Rom breaks into secure Area 51 on the station. And my number 1 pick was the Jefferies Tube set extension image used throughout Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and originating in the Next Generation.
I love that, and I see what you did there now. So you had the double theme pick, so you still had 5 overall picks in your 5
That's
rounds,
right.
even with the forced perspective. So we've got you had 4 Deep Space Nines and 1 Voyager on your list, which was awesome. Jen, how about you? Run down your 5.
Okay, number 5 was Voyager's Scientific Method. Number 4 was Voyager Learning Curve. Number 3, Deep Space Nine, The Adversary. Number 2, Deep Space Nine, Destiny. And number 1, Next Generation, Lessons.
All right, so you had 2 Voyagers, 2 Deep Space Nine, and 1 TNG. And my top 5 were from Deep Space Nine, Civil Defense, with Cisco, O'Brien, and Jake in the crawlway. My number 4 was from TNG, Starship Mine, the Death by Baryon sweep for random henchmen. My number 3 from the original series, the Doomsday Machine, and Scotty saving the day to beam Kirk out of harm's way. My number 2, TNG's Disaster, where they take Data's head out of a Jefferies tube to engineering. And my number 1 was from Voyager, Year of Hell, with the Chronoton torpedoes and 7 in Tuvok. So I had 1 from Deep Space Nine, 1 from TOS, 1 from Voyager, and 2 from TNG. So spread it around. So our stat summary, we actually only had 4 series represented. So 3 got shut out: Enterprise, Discovery, and the Kelvin timeline. We had 1 from TOS, 3 from TNG, 4 from Voyager, and 7 Deep Space Nine picks, which is great. And there was no duplicates, a rarity here on TrekRanks. Fantastic. And I did a quick count on how many picks where people were actually crawling through a Jefferies tube, and it was 11 picks with people crawling. So we love Jefferies Tubes, and we love this topic. Way too much fun.
One thing I noticed too with what we picked, we didn't have any clunker episodes. Sometimes, when you just do scenes, you can have a really good scene and a clunker of an episode. But these were all excellent episodes. I think it's because your big scenes are going to be the saving the day in the Jefferies Tube.
I'm looking at these pics right. 100%. These are all awesome episodes.
We also didn't have any representation from the feature films.
Correct. Yeah, none of the films. Thankfully, nobody picked The Final Frontier and Scotty bonking his head. Okay, don't let me go down that rabbit hole. I dislike that scene. All right, that was awesome and fun. But as we do every week, we've once again entered a temporal causality loop. So before we can depart, it's time to hear from you.
The Enterprise has been caught up in a temporal causality loop, and I suspect that something similar may have happened to you.
So our last couple episodes, we've played voicemail feedback from some of our listeners, but this week, wanted to get back to an old school temporal causality loop. So we're jumping all the way back to episode 35 and our top 5 TNG guilty pleasure episodes, which ended up actually being one of my favorite shows that we've done. I wasn't sure how that topic was going to work, but I think I ended up loving it, and I can't wait to do the rest of the series. And spoiler alert, we're hoping to do a special episode of DS9 Guilty Pleasures from Birmingham, England in October, when TrekRanks is going to be attending the Destination Star Trek convention. So we'll keep you posted on that if we can pull it off, but we think the timing is going to be right. Anyway, we got so many awesome lists submitted by our listeners for TNG Guilty Pleasures. And I'm going to highlight some of my favorite picks here with a few that had 5 words in the hashtag summaries. So first up was a list from Deborah Multisanti, who is at SilverDoe25 on Twitter. We always love hearing from Deborah, and she submitted a full list. So I wanted to highlight 2 unique picks on her 5 words in a hashtag. She had The Child, Dr. Pulaski front and center, hashtag, one is my name, the other is not. Love that pick. And then I love this 5 words in a hashtag. She picked symbiosis, and her 5 words in a hashtag were David Marcus and Joaquim arrive, hashtag TNG is a keeper. And she adds a note that she kind of knew at that point that TNG was going to be a great series when she saw those 2. So I love that moment. We also had a great 5-word summary from Robert Taffine, who is at rtaffine, Tafeen on Twitter. He picked Power Play, which is a cool pick and actually a cool Jefferies Tube scene.
Great episode.
I don't know if we mentioned that before, but
yeah. And Jordy says something like this is what Starfleet engineers thought of as rooming.
That's right. Easy access or something like that.
Easy access. Yeah.
He picked Power Play for his TNG Guilty Pleasure, and he had a great 5-word summary, which was Southern Polar Region Fetish Gang. And that just made me laugh because it's so true. Those guys were like all about the Southern Polar Region. So another great pick and 5-word summary came in from Chris at Shelf Nerds, and he picked Hero Worship, which I think is actually a very underrated episode. And his 5 words in a hashtag were every kid watching played Data, hashtag androids don't lie. So that was cool. And then one more great 5 words in a hashtag came in from our buddy Carl Wonders, who is at listening to film. And he had a great deep cut guilty pleasure pick with Samaritan Snare. And his 5 words in a hashtag was, can Geordi make them go? Hashtag not the Crimson Force Field. Any Crimson Force Field reference is A+ in my book. All right, and then one more quick list. I love this one. It came in from Joshua Zeller at Madcap of Science, and he did an all Deanna Troi TNG guilty pleasure list. So his 5 episodes it's pretty great because it's really very accurate. Night Terrors, The Price, The Loss, Man of the People, and The Child.
I would feel guilty about that list for sure.
I love that list. Very, very clever. All right. As always, thanks everyone for all the amazing responses to TrekRanks, which have once again allowed us to easily navigate our way out of this week's temporal causality loop. So please keep putting your list together and tweeting them to me at TrekRanks so we can share them with everyone on Twitter. And we also want to hear from you too. So please put together your own list of top 5 scenes in a Jefferies tube and give us a call. Tell us your list. You can call us at the tricorder transmissions at 609-512-5527. That's 609-512-LLAP. So hopefully we'll hear from you so you can be featured on the next episode of TrekRanks. And on the next episode of TrekRanks, we're hitting one of our long list topics that I've been looking forward to. It's been on our list for a while. We're doing our top 5 political episodes. So maybe a topic that's a little controversial, but I actually don't think it's going to be. Of course, to do a show about political episodes, which, by the way, is going to be, I think, a really broad topic for us because you can define political however you want. So I think it'll be pretty interesting to see what kind of picks people come up with. And to do that, to have a show on top 5 political episodes, well, there's no way we're going to do that without recruiting our boys Barry and Shashank from Politics right here on the Tricorder Transmissions Podcast Network. Can't wait to dive into it with those guys. So it should be pretty awesome. So Ken and Jen, anything jumping out at you guys that you might immediately include on your top 5 political episodes? Jen.
Justice.
Oh, but that's not bad, actually. It's totally political. That's their laws and their society. Yeah.
This is a really broad topic. I am interested to see what you guys come up with. I keep thinking of one-off problems like that, like Justice, the Masterpiece Society. For some reason, one that comes into my head. I think there's going to be a lot of those alien laws versus Starfleet rules. Should be really interesting.
It's funny you say that because I've been thinking about episodes, and so far I've been mostly focused on Starfleet. But you're right, the alien law angle is one to consider. And Justice is a great pick because it's such an awesome episode.
Guilty pleasure ones too.
Ken, how about you, man?
Well, I mean, I would have a list filling up quickly, I think. I mean, you think of things like, Measure of a Man, or I know it's not one of your favorite episodes, but Author, both dealing with artificial intelligent rights. You can go to something like First Contact from The Next Generation's 4th season about religion and science, or Distant Origin from Voyager and Heresy Against Doctrine.
Yep.
But there's a whole lot to pick from there for sure.
It really is a super broad topic now that we have kind of put it out there. So I think that'll be a fun one. And who knows, maybe we'll have 2 straight episodes with no duplicates. We shall see. All right, so before we wrap it up here, just a huge thanks to Ken Reilly and Jenn Tifft, 2 hugely knowledgeable Trekkies who we totally needed tonight because we know this was a tough topic, even though we had about 100 episodes that we rattled off, I think. So thanks, guys. Any final thoughts on your end?
I'm just glad I don't have to crawl through the Jefferies Tubes myself.
Of course.
I kind of want to crawl through the Jefferies Tubes, but it's the engineer in me, I guess.
I legitimately want an original series Jefferies Tube in my house. That would be the greatest thing ever.
I'm sure your cats would love it, Jim.
Oh, they would. Yes. Ensign Gravy would love it. All right. Thanks again, Ken and Jen. And thanks, everyone, for engaging with us here on episode 38 of the TrekRanks podcast. As always, I want to close by saying I'm looking forward to standing with you again here in this place where I belong.
No. Just stop saying that.
May I help you, gentlemen?
I was following you.
Must have taken a wrong turn.
It looks that way.
Much better.
Hi there, thanks again for listening. If you're cruising the galaxy looking for even more Trek talk, why not visit our good friends Bill and Dan over at TrekGeeks.com? They've got a great podcast that covers a wide range of Star Trek topics, so you're sure to find something you'll love. And if you're in the mood for some awesome tunes, then you really need to head over to 5yearmission.net. The guys are writing a song for every episode of the original series, and each one is absolutely brilliant. So that's trekgeeks.com and 5yearmission.net. Check them out today.
Mr. Scott.
Try inverse phasing.
Gentlemen, I suggest you beam me aboard.
10, 9, 8. Mr. Scott. 6.
I don't know, Mr. Kyle.
5, 4.
Bridge! We got him through!